My name is Elise Marin. I'm 37, and I got married on a cold April morning under a gray sky that looked like it hadn't made up its mind. I remember the mud more than the flowers, the way it clung to the hem of my dress, the way it made my steps feel heavier, like the ground wanted to keep me still. People always talk about their wedding day like it's some kind of crescendo, the emotional peak of a love story. For me, it was quieter than that. Not dull, not joyless, just quiet. Like the kind of silence you feel when you're underwater and watching sunlight break through above you. I was standing just off to the side of the aisle. The quartet was playing something soft and wandering. Caleb was waiting at the altar. I could see him from behind the curtain of birch trees. He had that look on his face, still sure like the moment didn't need fixing. It was enough. Then I felt a hand on my wrist. Cold fingers. Too light to be affectionate, too firm to ignore. My mother. She leaned in close, as if she was going to say something ceremonial, something spiritual, something a mother is supposed to say in moments like these. I turned my head slightly, and her breath touched my ear. You were always just a backup plan. Just like that. No emotion, not even cruelty in her voice. Just a simple, terrible truth she'd been saving for the most fragile moment she could find. I didn't blink. I didn't cry. I didn't ask her what she meant. I already knew. I'd known since I was 9, probably earlier, but back then, I didn't have words for it. It's strange how long you can carry something unnamed and still know it's Shap. So I leaned in and said calmly, "Check the guest list." She blinked like I'd spoken a language she didn't understand. Then she looked past me toward the rows of white chairs and the faces beginning to turn. I walked away before she could say anything else. I don't remember the processional. Not really. I remember the way the light landed on Caleb's face, the way he smiled like he was seeing all of me. I remember the way my dress whispered against the grass. And I remember feeling not nervous, not even relieved, just still. But what I said to her, that whisper, it stayed with me the whole day. Check the guest list. Because the people who were there, and the ones who weren't told a story, she had never bothered to read. It's easy to assume this is a story about a toxic mother. And maybe part of it is, but the real story is deeper, messier. It's about silence. It's about being the second choice and never being told directly, but always knowing. It's about growing up in a house where love was conditional and learning to live in the rooms where it didn't reach. I didn't plan on telling this story. Not out loud. Not to anyone outside the circle who already knew. But I've come to believe that stories like mine aren't just personal. They're patterned. Quiet girls with loud scars. Grown women who flinch when the phone rings with a mother's name. People who build whole lives out of the parts no one else noticed. So I'm telling this now. Not for her. For me. For the girl who sat in a dark pantry with a flickering candle hoping to be found and knowing she wouldn't be. Because this story didn't start at my wedding. It started much earlier in the spaces between, and it begins as so many things do with a silence. The kind that doesn't come from peace. The kind that fills your throat when someone who is supposed to love you says nothing at all. I used to sit on the floor of our pantry when I couldn't sleep. I was 7, maybe 8. I'd bring a small candle, the kind that came in the center of a birthday cake, and I'd light it with shaking hands, watching its tiny flame dance against the shelves of canned corn and dry pasta. That light made the darkness feel less final. It wasn't about the candle. It was about being seen even by a flicker. My mother never noticed I was missing from bed. Or if she did, she never said. Her love wasn't absent. It was conditional, measured, allocated. Her love was loud when Marissa won awards, when she aced science fairs, when she was crowned homecoming queen. My sister, the firstborn. The golden one. Marissa was never cruel to me. That's what made it worse. She didn't have to be. Her existence was a spotlight, and I lived in the corners it didn't touch. I didn't mind at first. When you're little, you take what's offered and make it enough. I told myself it was normal, that I just wasn't the kind of daughter mothers talked about with pride. I told myself I liked being small, quiet, observant, but even quiet girls have breaking points. There's a kind of grief that comes from being half-loved. It doesn't look dramatic. It's not crying on bathroom floors or throwing picture frames. It's slower. It seeps in. It colors the way you enter rooms, the way you tell stories, the way you flinch from compliments like they're traps. By the time I was in high school, I had become fluent in invisibility. My teachers liked me. My friends liked me. I wasn't unpopular. I was just forgettable. The kind of girl people remembered only when they needed help with homework or a ride home. Except one teacher. But I'll get to him later. This isn't all sadness, I promise. There are parts of this story that glow. But like I said, to understand what I said to my mother that day, you have to understand what she was trying to say when she whispered those words. You were always just a backup plan, not, I never loved you, not I wish you were someone else, but something colder, something smaller. You were useful only when the first option failed. And if that's the truth she believed, then I needed her to see the other truth, the one I built on my own. That guest list. It held every name that mattered, every person who had shown up for me when she didn't. Every soul who saw me not as a stand-in, not as a backup, but as someone worth witnessing. So when she sat in the second row, surrounded by strangers, she didn't recognize and realized her name wasn't mentioned in the speeches when she saw who I'd chosen to stand beside me maybe. Just maybe she finally understood. I was never a placeholder. I was the author. And she was a footnote. The pantry door never closed all the way. It caught on the frame, tilted just enough to let a slice of hallway light fall across the floor. That's where I sat most nights, when I couldn't sleep cross-legged, in my flannel pajamas, the yellow ones, with the worn-out knees. I kept a little glass jar on the bottom shelf behind the rice bags. Inside a half-used birthday candle, a matchbook from a seafood restaurant we'd never been to, and a folded paper napkin I once wrote on in crayon. In case of sadness, light this. I don't know where I got the idea. No one taught me that. But I believed in tiny rituals before I believed in God. I'd light the candle cuppet with my hands like I was protecting something sacred and stare. Sometimes I imagined it was a lighthouse. Other times a firefly that wanted to stay. But mostly it was just a way to feel like I was still here, not entirely forgotten. My mom, Claire, never came looking. She was usually asleep or pretending to be. She liked to say she needed beauty rest, even though the house was already quiet by 9, and I'd learned by then not to make noise after dinner. Dinner was always arranged, perfectly cooked always with matching napkins. But the air at that table was tight, like a room just before a storm. She didn't raise her voice, not ever. She didn't have to. Her disappointment was more efficient than anger. One glance, one sigh, and you'd fold. Marissa didn't fold. She sparkled. My older sister sat at that table like it belonged to her. She told stories from school, used her hands when she spoke, made our dad laugh. I watched. I nodded. I made sure the peas didn't roll off my plate. My mom used to rest her hand on Marissa's forearm when she laughed like she couldn't help herself. When I said something, if I said something, her fork would pause in the air for half a second, as if waiting to see whether it was worth responding to. Most times it wasn't. I don't think she hated me. That would have been easier. Hate is a kind of attention. What I got from Claire was more like assessment, a measuring glance every day. She was always doing math, weighing my words, calculating my weight, comparing my face to hers in old photos. It was like she kept expecting a different daughter to walk through the door. But I never came. Just me, Elise. At school, I didn't talk much. I read books under stairwells, wrote poems in the margins of math worksheets. I wasn't shy, not exactly. I was just always trying to make myself smaller. Like if I took up less space, maybe people would forget to be disappointed in me. The pantry became my sanctuary because it didn't ask anything of me. It didn't judge the way I chewed, or the grades I brought home, or how my hair never seemed to fall the way Marissa's did. It just held the quiet. One night, when I was 10, I left the candle burning too long. The wax melted down the sides and stuck to the shelf. The next morning, Claire saw the wax while reaching for pasta. She called me into the kitchen, held up the candle like it was evidence in a trial, and asked if I'd been playing with fire. I told her no. She paused that long Claire pause that meant she already knew the answer. "You've always had an imagination," she said. "But that's not going to get you anywhere." I nodded, apologized, scraped the wax off with a butter knife when she left the room. That was the first time I realized my version of reality, the one where I was quietly surviving, didn't matter to her. What mattered was control. And fire, even a candle's flicker, didn't fit in her world. After that, I kept the candle in a sock drawer instead, but I still lit it when she was out, when I couldn't breathe, when I needed to remind myself that some things could still glow. My dad, he wasn't cruel either. He just disappeared slowly, not physically. He came home every night, ate dinner, paid the bills. But he started lowering his eyes more often. Started going quiet when Claire was sharp. Once I asked him why he didn't say something when she snapped at me for forgetting to salt the potatoes. He just looked at me and said, "It's not worth the fight." But I was worth the fight. I just didn't know that yet. Marissa and I didn't talk much back then. She was always at rehearsals, competitions, student council events. She wasn't mean to me. She wasn't anything. That might be the saddest part. I think she thought she was protecting me by not including me, as if the best thing she could offer was space. I kept growing, but it felt like I was doing it in a shadow. My achievements weren't the kind you hang on the fridge. I didn't win awards. I didn't get straight A's. But I wrote stories that made my English teacher cry. I helped the boy who sat next to me in science class learn how to spell photosynthesis. I returned library books on time and said thank you to the janitor. Small things, candle things, quiet things that no one ever noticed. Except once, 6th grade, parent-teacher conferences. Claire had to cancel last minute for a hair appointment, so my dad came instead. My teacher, Ms. Alvarez, told him I had a rare kind of insight that I saw between the lines. My dad smiled, politely nodded, and repeated that to Claire over dinner like he was quoting a weather report. Claire responded with, "Well, that's nice, but she really needs to work on her posture." That night, I lit the candle. I let it burn almost to the end, and I wrote a poem on the back of an envelope. It started with, "If I am the shadow, then maybe I move with the sun." I think that poem was the first time I understood what I wanted. Not attention. Not even love, at least not hers. Just to be seen clearly. Not compared. Not weighed. Just seen. It would take me another 2 decades to stop asking her to do that. But even back then, something inside me knew. The pantry girl, the candle keeper, she wasn't broken. She was becoming. Marissa used to walk into a room like she was already the story. Even when we were kids, she had that glow. The kind that made other mothers lean in and say things like, "She's going to do something big one day." Claire would beam, not even bothering to pretend she wasn't soaking it in. That was the thing about my mother. She didn't just want to be proud of her daughter. She wanted to be admired through her and Marissa. She gave her that. Debate trophies, perfect grades, student council speeches with just the right balance of charm and ambition. She had that way of speaking that made teachers lean forward and classmates feel lucky just to be in the same room. I didn't hate her. I want that to be clear. It was never about hate. It was gravity. She had her own orbit, and I was just part of the debris pulled along with it. People thought we were close because we looked similar, same long dark hair, same tilted eyes. But she walked like she had a destination. I walked like I was still checking the map. Sometimes I wondered what it felt like to be the chosen one. Not in some dramatic golden child kind of way. Just in the quiet ways, the way Claire would start conversations with Marissa's name, even when she wasn't in the room. Marissa says, Marissa thinks, Marissa prefers. I was there too at those dinners, those car rides, but I was more of a fixture, background. There was a birthday party once, Marissa's 12th, my 9th. It was space-themed because she'd just won the regional science fair with a presentation on black holes. I remember standing beside her as she opened gifts. Mine was small, a hand-painted card and a set of gel pens I'd saved my allowance to buy. She opened it, smiled politely, and set it aside. Claire gave me a tight little nod like a pat on the head you'd give a dog for not barking. Later, I found the pens in the trash. That night, I sat in the pantry and didn't light the candle. I just stared into the dark and wondered if being kind was worth anything when no one noticed. By high school, the pattern had become law. Marissa applied early to Stanford. Claire framed the acceptance letter. I got an A in English for a short story I wrote, and Claire told me to be realistic about my future. She said that word like a threat. Realistic. It meant trade your softness for something measurable. Get a skill. Be useful. Marissa will be able to take care of herself, she said once. You need to be smart about your choices. I asked her what that meant. She didn't answer. Just folded laundry in silence, like the conversation was over. I wish I could say Marissa defended me. That she stepped in corrected. Claire pulled me into her light. But she didn't, and maybe she couldn't. Because the light she had, it wasn't something she owned. It was borrowed, and she knew it. She wasn't cruel. That would have given me something to push against. She was simply unreachable. She moved through the world like she belonged to it. I moved through like I was still asking permission. There were moments, though. Quiet ones. When we'd pass each other in the hallway late at night, her coming back from a party, me from the pantry. She'd glance at me and say, "You okay?" And I'd always say, "Yeah." She never pushed further, and I never asked her to. But sometimes, I wondered what it would have been like if we'd grown up in a different house. One where love didn't have to be earned with achievements. One where dinner didn't feel like a performance. One where I wasn't always holding my breath waiting to be dismissed. Claire had this way of saying things without saying them. Like when she saw me in a dress and said, "That's brave." Or when she heard me playing guitar, an old one I found in the attic, and said, "Well, as long as you enjoy it, I guess that's what matters." She was always slipping in the subtext. You're not talented. You're not beautiful. But at least you're trying. She gave compliments like warnings, and love like credit handed out only when the returns were obvious. I learned to swallow disappointment in doses. Little ones. A skipped recital. A missed birthday. A sideways glance. Each one a quiet subtraction. Each one teaching me how to disappear just a little better. Marissa once caught me in the garage crying. I was 16. I'd just gotten my PSAT scores high, but not perfect. Claire had looked at them and said, "Well, Marissa scored a little higher, but this is good for you." I don't even know why I showed her. I think part of me still hoped she'd see me. Marissa saw the tears and didn't say anything. She just sat beside me and handed me a tissue. Then softly, "She doesn't know how to talk to you. That's not your fault." It was the kindest thing she ever said to me, but it wasn't enough. Because that's the thing about orbiting someone, you can't just stop. You spin until something pulls you out, or until you gather enough force to break away. The force came years later in an envelope. But before that, I stayed in the loop, smiling for photos, clapping at Marissa's graduation, listening to Claire tell friends at dinner parties how blessed she was to have such a driven daughter. As if the other one, me, was just fine print. I used to wonder if Claire would have loved me more if I'd been louder. If I'd joined the debate team. If I'd worn brighter clothes or laughed at the right times, or asked her for advice on boys. But even when I tried, even when I pretended it never landed, she didn't want a different Elise. She wanted another Marissa. And there I was, the extra, the shadow, the backup plan. I didn't know back then that one day I'd become the storm she didn't see coming. That one day on my wedding day, I'd look her in the eye and say something she wouldn't understand until it was too late. But every quiet night, every pantry candle, every word left unsaid, it was leading me there. She thought I was forgettable. She didn't realize I was learning. The sound that woke me wasn't loud, just a thud, then a muffled curse. I was 15. It was late. The kind of night when the whole house creaked like it was tired of holding everything together. I pushed back the sheet's feet already bracing for the cold floor and padded down the hallway. The bathroom light was on, and inside, hunched over the sink, was Marissa. Her hair was tangled eyeliner, smudged into gray shadows beneath her eyes. She was trying to press a towel to her mouth, but her hands were shaking. There was blood on the porcelain. A lot of it, and a bottle of wine, almost empty, sitting crooked on the edge of the counter, like it had been trying to escape gravity and failed. She looked at me, eyes wild, not with fear, but something more fragile. Embarrassment. Like the shine had worn off, and I'd caught her without it. "Don't tell Mom," she whispered. I didn't. I stepped inside and took the towel from her, rinsed it under warm water, dabbed gently. Her lip was split clean down the middle, the kind of cut that would leave a scar even if it healed right. She winced. "Bathroom sink corner," she muttered. "Drunk genius move." I didn't ask where she'd been. Didn't ask who she was with. I just sat beside her on the edge of the tub and held the towel when she needed to spit. Her mascara left a smudge on my shoulder and she didn't notice. I did. I noticed everything. That's what people like me do, the ones who live in silence. We become experts in details. I'd been there maybe 5 minutes, just enough time for the blood to stop when we heard Claire's footsteps. They were always unmistakable, a kind of clipped rhythm that carried warning in it. She opened the bathroom door without knocking. Her eyes took it in fast, the blood, the towel, the wine, Marissa's lip. Then they landed on me. "Elise," she said sharply, "what did you do?" It wasn't a question. It was a judgment wearing the costume of one. I didn't answer. I didn't know how. My hands were still damp from rinsing the towel, and suddenly they felt criminal. I started, but she cut me off. "You let her drink? You let this happen? Do you have any idea what's at stake for her future?" The way she said her, you'd think I was some stranger who had wandered in and contaminated the place. Marissa tried to speak, but Claire wasn't looking at her anymore. She'd already chosen a narrative, and in that story, I was the problem. She sent me to bed. I didn't argue. As I walked down the hall, I heard her switch from cold to soft, the voice she used only for Marissa. "Let's get some ice, baby. We'll call Dr. Shelby in the morning. You're okay." It hit me then, the way she could shape reality like clay, smoothing over the parts that didn't serve her. She didn't care what had happened. Not really. She cared how it would look, how it might ripple into college interviews or dinner party gossip. My role in that house was not daughter. It was scapegoat. The next morning, Marissa didn't come down for breakfast. Claire made pancakes. She never made pancakes unless company was over. She placed a plate in front of me like it meant something. "I hope you've learned from last night," she said, cutting into hers. "You can't always fix people. Sometimes you need to let them take responsibility." It was such a strange thing to say. I remember thinking, who did she think I was trying to fix? But I nodded, because that was the currency in our house compliance. I saw Marissa later that afternoon. She was wearing a hoodie, the hood pulled low. She didn't say much, just handed me a tube of antibiotic cream. "Thanks," she said, for not freaking out. I wanted to ask her if she remembered if she really saw what happened, if she knew that Mom blamed me because it was easier than admitting Marissa wasn't perfect. But she just left the room moving like someone too tired to untangle anything. I didn't mention the scar again, but I watched it heal. Slowly. First raw and red, then soft pink, then a thin white line that caught the light when she smiled. Most people never noticed it, but I did. Every time we sat across from each other, every holiday, every photo. That scar became a landmark, proof that even Marissa could break, and proof that I was the one who stayed steady when she did. It didn't make me feel better, just lonelier. Because after that night, Claire's surveillance of me intensified. I'd catch her watching me during dinner, asking me where I'd been if I came home 5 minutes late, telling me offhandedly, "You know your sister wouldn't have gotten into Stanford if she'd been messing around." Messing around. That's what she thought I was doing, like I was some problem waiting to bloom into failure. She started checking my grades more often, not to celebrate them, just to monitor. She never asked if I was okay. Never wondered what it felt like to be blamed for someone else's fall. I tried to write about it once. For English class, we had to write a personal essay. I called it The Quiet Witness. My teacher gave it an A. Wrote in the margins, "Your restraint is more powerful than confession." I showed it to Claire. She skimmed it, handed it back. "I hope you're not trying to paint this family in a bad light," she said. "You never know who reads what." That was her fear. Not truth, not pain, reputation. And I think that's when the shift started in me. It wasn't loud. It wasn't cinematic. It was just a crack in the foundation. A moment when I realized that if I stayed in her world, I'd always be the villain in her stories. So I started keeping a different kind of journal. Not of my feelings, but of moments. A look, a line, a scar, proof. Not for revenge, not even for justice. Just for me. So I wouldn't forget, so I wouldn't let her rewrite it later. Marissa's scar faded, but I kept seeing it, because mine were invisible, but no less real. It arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, folded into the mail stack like it didn't mean anything. I remember the envelope because it was heavier than the others. Cream-colored, the kind of paper that felt like it knew it carried news. My name typed neatly on the front, Elise Morin. No middle initial, just me. I stood in the kitchen, fingers tracing the flap, and for a moment, I didn't open it. Not because I was afraid of rejection. I knew I had done enough. But because I wanted to hold on to the possibility, that tiny sliver of before, where I could still imagine my mother's face lighting up for me. I opened it, read it twice. A full ride to Northwestern, English program, honors track, and for the first time in what felt like years, I smiled without restraint. Claire was in the den watching TV, Some kind of lifestyle segment about restoring old furniture. I stood in the doorway, letter in hand. "I got in?" I said. She didn't turn around right away. "Into what Northwestern?" "Full ride." She muted the television slowly, then swiveled in her chair. Her face was unreadable. Not angry, not surprised, just calculating. "That's far," she said. "I know." Her eyes flicked to the letter, then back to me. "Are you sure you're ready for that kind of independence?" It was such a strange word choice. Independence. Like I'd been asking permission to grow up. I waited for the rest. For the congratulations. The hug. The moment you think is coming your whole childhood. The one where the parent finally sees you. It didn't come. "Well," she said, standing. "Just make sure you don't waste it." Then she left the room. I stood there for a long time after she was gone, holding the letter like it had betrayed me somehow. As if it was supposed to do more than just open a door. As if it could make her walk through it with me. That night, Marissa found me on the back porch. I was tracing the edge of the acceptance letter, with my thumb folding and unfolding the crease. She sat beside me. "She's never going to say it," she said softly. "The thing you want her to." I didn't look at her. I didn't want her to see the wetness in my eyes. "She said I should be careful," I whispered. Marissa gave a short laugh. "Not mean tired." She said the same thing when I told her I wanted to take a gap year. "You mean the travel year?" She smirked. "Yeah, that's what we told her friends. But really, I just couldn't breathe anymore. I needed space." I turned to her. "Why didn't you tell me that?" Then she shrugged. "I think I thought I had to protect the image. Hers, mostly. Maybe mine. But definitely not yours. You always seemed so small. I didn't think you could handle it. I didn't say anything. Because that hurt more than I expected." "I was wrong," she added. Silence stretched between us. But it wasn't the same kind of silence that Claire dealt in. This one had room in it. Space to move. When she finally stood, she squeezed my shoulder. "You're stronger than she knows," she said. "Maybe even than I know." I held on to that sentence like a stone in my pocket. When the time came to move, Claire didn't offer to drive me. She was booked solid that weekend, something about a charity luncheon and new shelving in the laundry room. I didn't press. I didn't want her there anymore. Marissa came instead. We packed my things into her hatchback. Clothes, a small lamp, too many notebooks. The candle from the pantry tucked in a shoebox. I remember the ride more than the goodbye. The way the morning light hit the fields. The smell of fast food fries between us. Marissa humming along to the radio and pretending not to be worried. She carried one box into the dorm with me, then paused in the doorway. "You okay?" she asked. I nodded. "You?" She smiled, but it was hollow. "Let me know when you're settled." "I will." I didn't hug her. Not then. We weren't there yet, but I watched her walk away, and it struck me how much older she looked than I remembered. How much weight she carried that no one ever talked about. Claire's version of love hadn't just bruised me, it had shaped Marissa too. Made her brittle in places no one could see. That first night on campus, I lit the candle. Just for a moment. Just to remind myself that I was somewhere new. I placed it on the windowsill, watched it flicker against the glass. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like a shadow. I felt like a person. College wasn't perfect. I didn't become fearless overnight. I still hesitated before speaking in class, still overthought every email, still apologized for things that weren't my fault. But little by little, I started to inhabit myself. My writing professors didn't just read my work, they heard me. One of them, Dr. Louis, pulled me aside after a workshop and said, "You write like someone who sees through walls." I didn't know how to respond, so I said thank you and cried in the library bathroom afterward. I made friends. Not many, but real ones. People who didn't ask who I was compared to. People who laughed too loudly and cried without shame and asked me questions like, "What makes you feel free?" I told them stories about my childhood carefully, piece by piece. I didn't say my mother's name, but they knew the type. There's always someone who knows. I stopped waiting for Claire to call. She sent one care package, a box of protein bars, a face wash sample, and a note that said, "Hope you're staying healthy. Love, Mom." I didn't write back, because by then I understood something: not every absence needs to be filled. Some are meant to stay hollow, so you can hear your own voice echo back. The envelope that brought me to college wasn't just an invitation. It was an exit, a permission slip to become more than what I was told I could be. Claire saw that envelope and saw a risk. I saw a beginning, and I never let her hold the pen again. He was playing a Jeff Buckley cover in the back of a bookstore cafe the first time I saw him. It was the kind of place with old carpet and chipped mugs, the smell of cinnamon and used books soaked into the furniture. I'd gone in to escape a storm. The kind with sideways rain and angry wind, the kind that makes your hair stick to your face no matter how fast you run. I didn't plan to stay. But I saw him hunched over his guitar, hair falling into his eyes, and something about the way he played made me sit down. Not just the song, but the way he played it, like he wasn't performing, like he was remembering something. After he finished, I didn't clap. I just sipped my coffee and watched the way he tucked his guitar pick into his sleeve, like it was a secret. Later, as I stood in the poetry section thumbing through a Mary Oliver collection, he walked past and said, "She always knew how to end a line without apologizing." I looked up. "Excuse me, Oliver?" he said, pointing at the book. "She stops where others explain." I must have looked startled because he smiled sheepish. "Sorry." That sounded less creepy in my head. I smiled back. "No, you're right. I always thought her punctuation felt like exhale." He tilted his head. "That's exactly it. We didn't introduce ourselves. We just kept talking. About books mostly. Songs. The difference between lonely and alone." He said his name was Caleb eventually when the barista started closing up, and I realized I'd missed the last bus. He offered to walk me home. I said yes. It wasn't romantic. Not that night, but it was noticed. I'd spent so long being the quiet girl in the corner that when someone really looked at me, not past me, I didn't know what to do with it. The next time I saw him, he was playing Radiohead. I stayed again. This time he brought me tea afterward and sat beside me on the carpet near the travel section. "You come here a lot?" he asked. "Only when it rains." "Then I hope the forecast is miserable." We dated like people who weren't trying to impress each other, slowly, with room to be awkward. He didn't ask about my family, not right away. He never pushed, just paid attention. I'd catch him watching me when I didn't realize, not in a possessive way, just careful, curious, kind. When I finally told him about Claire, it came out in fragments. A story here, a detail there. He listened like someone assembling a puzzle without forcing the pieces. "She made me feel like I was extra," I said once. He shook his head. "You're not extra, Elise. You're the part people skip and regret later." I cried when he said that. Not because it was beautiful, but because it was so specific, like he saw the exact wound and didn't flinch. He wasn't perfect. He was late a lot, always forgetting his keys, leaving half-empty coffee cups around my apartment. But he was present, steady, like a lighthouse, but not the dramatic kind, more like a porch light someone leaves on because they know you're coming back. The first time he met Marissa, he was nervous. I could tell. He asked too many questions, kept adjusting the sleeves of his flannel shirt. Marissa was polite but distant. She asked him what his career goals were in a tone that made it clear she was measuring something. He answered without blinking. I want to make enough money to never have to own a tie. She raised an eyebrow. So, musician mostly, and guitar repair, and I teach kids on the weekends. They don't care about titles. Later I asked him if her coolness bothered him. He just shrugged. She's not the one I'm trying to marry. It was the first time he said that word. Marry. We weren't even engaged yet. But the way he said it didn't feel heavy. It felt like gravity doing its job. He proposed a year later. Not with fireworks or a public scene. We were brushing our teeth side by side. He spat rinsed, looked at me through the mirror and said, You want to do this for the next 50 years? I paused mid-rinse. Brush teeth, no. Life. I laughed, then nodded, toothpaste still in my mouth. Romantic, right? The ring wasn't a diamond. I didn't want one. I picked it myself, a thin gold band with a single garnet, deep red, like the color of something rooted. When I showed Claire a photo, she paused. That's unconventional. It's mine, I said. She frowned. But garnets aren't real engagement stones. I don't need it to be symbolic. Well, people will talk, then let them. She blinked like she hadn't expected pushback, then said quietly, I hope you know what you're doing. I almost laughed, because that was Claire's idea of a blessing, a veiled warning. But I did know. Not everything. Not how to be a wife, not how to have a perfect marriage. But I knew how to recognize a kind of love that didn't come with strings. With Caleb, I didn't have to audition. I didn't have to prove my usefulness. I could be tired, sad, sharp-edged. He never tried to fix me, just made room. He once said, You don't need to be okay to be loved. That was the most radical thing anyone had ever said to me. Because for 30 years, I believed love was a reward for performance. That if you smiled right, made yourself small, kept the peace, maybe someone would notice. Maybe someone would choose you. But Caleb didn't choose me because I was small. He chose me because I started standing up, and I said yes to him because I finally believed I could. We went home for Thanksgiving once, just once. I thought maybe things had changed. That time and distance softened people the way sunlight fades sharp colors. Caleb thought so too. Or maybe he didn't. Maybe he was just willing to try, because I asked. It had been almost 3 years since I'd left for college, and 2 since I'd seen Claire for longer than a brief lunch. We were living together in a small apartment, then mismatched dishes, a perpetually squeaky window fan, a record player that only worked when we balanced a mug on one corner. We were building something honest. It didn't always feel sturdy, but it felt real. Claire sent an invitation, a printed card, no personal note, just the date and time. The font was the kind you use when you care more about impression than intimacy. I think it's a test, I said to Caleb. He looked up from his guitar. You gonna take it? I don't know. Maybe I want to pass it just once. He nodded. Then I'll go with you. He brought a bottle of wine red, something smoky that he said tastes like old houses in velvet. I brought my quiet hope. We arrived just after 2. Claire opened the door wearing beige. Always beige. She said it was timeless, but I think she just liked not having to pick a side. Caleb, she said, extending a hand like he was a new intern. So good to finally meet you. He smiled. Nice to meet you, Mrs. Marin. She didn't invite us in. She stepped aside like she was allowing us to enter something sacred. I looked around. The house hadn't changed, same pristine carpet, same smell of lemon polish, and something faintly artificial. Marissa was already there, of course. She looked polished, too, hair pulled back, wearing a tailored navy dress and pearls. She was standing next to her fiancé, Evan, a surgeon, handsome in a movie villain sort of way. Claire hovered near him like he might confer some status just by breathing near her. The table was already set. Place cards. Linen napkins folded into fans. It looked like a catalog. Dinner started on time. Claire poured the wine Caleb brought, sipped it, said, "Interesting choice," and then placed her glass down without another word. The meal was filled with the kind of conversation that floats but never lands. Evan talked about surgical rotations. Claire nodded like she understood every term. Marissa mentioned a new condo. No one asked me about my writing. No one asked Caleb anything at all. He tried. He complimented the meal, asked Marissa about her travel year, asked Claire about the garden. She said it's doing well and then pivoted to how hard roses are to maintain. Not once did she say my name. Not once did she look at me like a daughter. And somewhere between the cranberry sauce and the fourth awkward silence, I realized I didn't need her to. After dessert, we moved into the living room. Caleb leaned over and whispered, "This feels like a job interview I didn't study for." I smiled. "You're doing fine." He touched my hand, gentle. "Does she always treat you like this?" I didn't answer at first. The fire in the hearth was artificial. You could see the plastic logs if you looked close. "She doesn't see me," I said quietly. "She never has." He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "I do." We left not long after that. Claire hugged Caleb at the door stiffly, like she'd practiced affection in a mirror. She didn't hug me, just said "drive safe" and closed the door before I could reply. In the car, I stared out the window. Caleb turned down the radio. "You okay?" he asked. "Yeah." "You sure?" I nodded. I think I finally stopped expecting anything different. He waited a beat. "I'm sorry." I reached over and took his hand. "Don't be," I said. I think that was the moment I let her go. And it was. Not with anger. Not with some big internal speech. Just quietly. Like setting down a heavy coat you forgot you were wearing. Later that night in our apartment, we sat on the floor eating leftover pie from paper towels. Caleb played a little on his guitar. Half-songs fragments. I curled up next to him, my head on his knee. "She's never going to say it is she?" I asked. He paused, then played a few soft notes. "No," he said. "But maybe you don't need her to anymore." It hit me then I'd been waiting my whole life for her words. Her blessing. Her approval. Like some gate I couldn't pass through without the right password. But what if I'd already walked past it? What if the gate was just gone? Claire had her world. Tight. Curated. All beige and politeness and performance. I had mine now. Scratched records and mismatched mugs and a man who saw me even when I didn't say a word. That Thanksgiving, I learned something I'd been afraid to name. Family isn't who keeps your seat at the table. It's who sits with you on the floor, eating cold pie, and loving you anyway. He didn't kneel. There wasn't a photographer hiding in the bushes, or a crowd gasping in choreographed surprise. No champagne, no fireworks. It was a Thursday night. We'd just finished dinner lentils and garlic bread and were brushing our teeth. I had toothpaste foam on my chin when he said it. "You still want to do this thing with me?" he asked, like he'd just remembered to pick up the dry cleaning. I turned to him, toothbrush still in my mouth. He grinned. "Marriage. That thing." I spat into the sink. "Are you proposing while we're in our pajamas?" "Technically, yes. You didn't even get a ring." "Because I know you," he said. "And you'd rather pick one yourself?" He was right. I didn't want a ring from a display case. I wanted something quiet, something mine. I found it a week later, a slender gold band with a single garnet small and deep like dried blood. Not traditional, not sparkly, just real. When I showed Caleb, he said, "Looks like something that could outlast a fire." Claire's reaction was less poetic. She stared at the photo I texted her for 3 minutes before replying. "That's the ring," I texted back. "Yes. But garnets aren't for engagements," she wrote. "This one is." She didn't respond. That weekend, she called Marissa. "I know this because Marissa called me." "She's spiraling," she said. I figured. "She says you're rejecting the whole idea of tradition, that you're doing this to make a statement." "I'm not," I said. "But if she sees it that way, fine. You know she wants to be involved, right?" "No," I said quietly. "She wants to control it." There was a pause. "She wants to matter," Marissa said eventually. "In your life." She had 30 years. Another pause. Longer this time. "She asked if she could help plan the wedding." I laughed. "Not kindly, Elise." "No, I mean it. She can come if she wants, but this wedding, it's ours. Mine and Caleb's. Not a stage for her to curate." "I get that," Marissa said. "Just be prepared. She doesn't like not being center." I noticed. After we hung up, I sat in the dark, with my hand spread out in front of me, watching the garnet catch the dim light from the hallway. It wasn't a flashy stone. It didn't scream engaged. It didn't scream anything. It whispered. And I liked that. I liked that it said, "I'm here because someone chose me." We planned the wedding our way. No church, no seating chart politics, no beige. The venue was a family orchard. Caleb's friend owned rows of bare apple trees, strung lights, and enough space to feel like we didn't owe the day to anyone but ourselves. Claire sent a list of suggestions. Florists, caterers, musicians. I didn't reply. 3 days later, she left a voicemail. "I just want your day to be beautiful, Elise." I listened, then deleted it, because the subtext wasn't beautiful. It was acceptable, and I was done living by her rubric. Caleb and I chose a small quartet who played out of tune sometimes, but made up for it with heart. We chose handwritten menus. We chose favors made from beeswax and linen little candles with names printed in tiny script. I chose my dress alone. It wasn't white. It was off-white. Cream, really. Soft sleeves, low back. Something that moved when I breathed. When the clerk sipped me in and I saw myself in the mirror, I didn't see a bride. I saw a woman who no longer needed to shrink to be seen. Claire called again when she found out about the dress. "Cream," she said flatly. "Yes, you'll look washed out. I'll look like me." Claire," I interrupted. "I'm not asking for approval." Silence, then clipped. "You never do." That was the last real conversation we had before the wedding. She didn't help plan. She didn't ask about colors or flowers or vows. She just waited perched on the edge of involvement, hoping I'd ask her in. I didn't, because I remembered every time I'd reached for her, every poem she skimmed, every phone call she ended too early, every look of disappointment when I didn't measure up. This wasn't about punishment. It was about boundaries. She had her chance. Now I was writing a new script, one where love wasn't negotiated, one where showing up meant more than being seen. As the day got closer, Caleb kept a list on our fridge titled True Witnesses. It wasn't the official guest list. It was our list, the people who mattered. People who'd shown up when it wasn't convenient. People who saw us fully. My high school English teacher was on it. The one who told me my writing was a kind of truth serum. My college roommate who drove 6 hours to bring me soup when I got pneumonia. The barista from the bookstore cafe who played piano at our engagement dinner. Even Marissa made the list. Not because we were close, but because she tried, in her own way, and sometimes trying is enough. Claire wasn't on the list. She was on the invitation, sure. But not the list. Not the people we would raise our glasses to. Not the ones we'd thank in our speeches. Caleb asked me once, "Do you want her there?" I thought about it, really thought. And then I said, I want her to see what she wasn't able to ruin. He didn't flinch. He nodded. Then we'll keep the door open, he said. But we won't wait for her to walk through it. The ring fit perfectly from day one, like it had always belonged. Some people looked at it and said, "Oh, is that a birthstone?" Others smiled awkwardly, not sure what to say. But every time I looked down, I saw proof. Not of Caleb's love. I never needed proof of that, but of my own decision. To choose a love that didn't come with a price. To wear something that didn't ask for permission. To claim my life in quiet, steady ways. And when Claire stood at my wedding and whispered her final cut, "You were always just a backup plan," I looked her in the eye and said, "Check the guest list." Because the ring wasn't the only thing I chose. I chose who got to witness the real me, and she wasn't on that list. The idea came to me late one night, half asleep, fingers curled around Caleb's. Not revenge, not spectacle. Just something quiet, deliberate, a different kind of list. I kept it in my notebook at first, between the vows I hadn't finished and a grocery list I never started. I titled the page, "Who Witnessed Me?" Not guest list, not seating chart, witnessed. There's a difference. A guest shows up because they're expected to. A witness carries something for you. Remembers. Holds it with both hands. Claire would never understand the difference, so I built the list in silence. My father was first. I hadn't seen him in a decade, not since he left Claire for a woman who wore linen pants and believed in sound baths. I was 19 then. I didn't blame him, not entirely. He emailed me out of the blue a year before the wedding. No apology. Just a line, "I heard you're writing now." I'm glad. That was all. But it was enough to open a door. We started talking. Slowly, carefully. About books mostly. About places we'd both never been. When I told him about the engagement, he didn't ask for a role. Just said, "If you want me there, I'll come." No expectations. That made the list. Then there was Mr. Lenehan, my high school English teacher. He once handed back a story I wrote with a note, "You write like someone trying to outrun silence." I kept that note in a drawer for years. I mailed him an invitation with a handwritten message, "You helped me hear my own voice." He RSVP'd within 2 days, the barista from the bookstore Cafe Mona. She once told Caleb and me we looked like two people who were quietly saving each other. She was right. She baked the muffins for our engagement party, wrapped them in brown paper with little wax seals. We didn't ask her to. She just did it. She was on the list. And Marissa. I hesitated. But in the end, I wrote her name. Not because she'd ever truly been there for me, but because I knew she wanted to be now. And because sometimes love isn't loud. It's just choosing to stay when it's easier to leave. Marissa sent a voice note after the invite arrived. She didn't say, "I'm happy for you." She didn't say, "I love you." She said, "I'm proud of you." That was enough. Every name I added felt like a stitch, closing something that had been open too long. Claire never asked who we were inviting. She just assumed. That was always her fatal flaw, mistaking proximity for inclusion. A week before the wedding, she sent an email titled, "Final touches with bullet points." Inchuft. Suggest alternate tablecloth color? Ivory too dull. Consider adding Evan to speech rotation. He's very eloquent. Florist suggestion. Belle Botanica used them for Marissa's engagement dinner. I didn't reply. Instead, I forwarded it to Caleb with the subject line, "Unsubscribe." He texted back a single candle emoji. That made me laugh. The night before the wedding, I sat cross-legged on the floor with the list in front of me. Not the planner version. The real one. Names in my own handwriting, ink smudged from thumbprints and coffee stains. I read each name aloud. Not to anyone. Just into the room. It felt like a prayer, or maybe a spell. every person I chose was a counterweight to the narrative I'd been handed. I wasn't a backup plan. I was a constellation of people who saw me when I didn't know how to be seen. And Claire. She was invited, but not included. I didn't assign her a role. I didn't give her a speech, or a spotlight, or a mother of the bride moment. Her name wasn't printed on the program. No special corsage, just a seat, just an option. She called Marissa the morning of the wedding. I know because I heard it through the wall. She hasn't let me do anything she said. Not a single thing. I'm just supposed to show up like I'm anyone else. Marissa's reply was muffled, but I caught one line. Maybe just showing up is the point. That afternoon, she did show up. Beige dress, clutched like a weapon, expression tightly stitched. She took her seat in the second row, not the front. I didn't plan it that way, but I didn't stop it either. As I stood under the canopy of orchard trees, whined tugging at the hem of my dress, I looked out at the rows of faces. I saw Caleb smiling like the moment was exactly enough. I saw my father crying quietly into his tie. I saw Mr. Lenehan sitting straight-backed, hands folded over a small notebook. Mona beaming. Marissa eyes locked on me steady. And Claire staring, not at me, but at the people she didn't recognize. Because for the first time, she wasn't at the center of the story. She was a guest in a narrative she didn't author. And just before the vows, when the music swelled and the whole orchard seemed to pause, she stood. She moved beside me, leaning in close just enough that I could feel her breath on my neck. "You were always just a backup plan," she whispered. I didn't flinch. I didn't even look at her. I said soft and sharp, so only she could hear, "Check the guest list." Then I walked forward. I didn't look back, because the people in front of me weren't standing in her shadow. They were standing in mine. The night before the wedding, I stood in the doorway of my childhood bedroom for the first time in years. Claire hadn't changed it much. The beige carpet was still there, clean enough to feel unreal. The window shades still rattled when the wind came in from the east. The walls were a pale, tired pink, the same color I begged for at age 8. But the stenciled letters of my name had been painted over. There was a faint outline if you looked closely. A ghost of Elise under the new coat. The Y from "You Are Special" still hung crooked above the dresser, even though I was sure no one in this house had believed that in a long time. I didn't go in. I stood in the doorway like a question. I don't know what I was waiting for. Maybe some kind of wave of grief or nostalgia. But what came instead was quiet. Not the silence I'd known as a kid, not the tight-lipped kind that throbbed behind every closed door. This quiet was clean, still. I lit a tea candle and set it on the threshold. A small thing. Wax and wick. I didn't light it for ceremony. I lit it for her, the girl who used to sit in the pantry and hope the flame would keep her from disappearing. I sat beside it for a long time, knees tucked to my chest, watching it flicker. The house was asleep, or pretending to be. Claire had gone to bed early. She said she wanted to be rested for the big day. But we both knew she wasn't sleeping. She was rehearsing. Every time I let myself think she might show up differently, she proved me wrong. But this time, I didn't expect it. I didn't need it. The candle burned lower. My knees started to ache. I thought about all the versions of myself I'd walked away from to get here, the invisible daughter, the second choice, the one who always tried not to ask for too much. She was still with me, but not in charge anymore. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the list. The one with all the names that mattered. The real guest list. I read it again slowly by candlelight. My dad, Mr. Lenehan, Mona, Marissa. Caleb, of course. Each name felt like a light switched on in a house that had stayed dark too long. Claire wasn't on it. Not because I wanted to hurt her, but because she had never really stood for me, not when it counted. And now I'd stopped making space for people who only showed up when there was something to gain. I unfolded a second piece of paper. A list of things I'd stopped waiting for. Her apology, her blessing, her version of love, her understanding, her pride. I folded it again and slid it under the candle. The flame bent forward as if reading it, then steadied. I thought about knocking on her door, not to reconcile, just to look her in the eye and say, tomorrow isn't about you. But I didn't, because I didn't need her to know. I just needed to know I could choose not to. That was the shift, the transformation. I always thought healing would feel like triumph, but it didn't. It felt like walking past a room I used to live in and not needing to go back inside. It felt like standing in a doorway with no urge to cross the threshold. It felt like letting the candle burn out and not relighting it. I sat there until the wax gave up its shape, until the wick became a dot of smoke. Then I stood, closed the door, didn't look back. In the guest room, the one she tried to make neutral for company Caleb was already asleep. One hand stretched out toward my side of the bed like he was making room in his dreams. I slid in beside him and whispered, "You're not the first person to choose me, but you're the first one who didn't make me earn it." He stirred, half awake, smiled without opening his eyes. "Still true," he said. The next morning I rose early. The sky was soft gray, the kind that makes you squint to see where the clouds end. I dressed alone. I tied the shoes Marissa mailed me from Paris. I pinned my hair without help. I traced the scar on my left knuckle, the one from a bookshelf accident when I was 7, reaching for a poetry book Claire told me not to touch. I touched it anyway. The car ride to the orchard was quiet. Caleb held my hand the whole way. When we arrived, the trees were still bare, their limbs reaching out like they wanted to hold something. The air smelled like cold apples and beginnings. Claire arrived late. Of course she did. She walked in with her chin up her clutched her outfit, a catalogue of restrained elegance. Beige again. Like armor. She didn't greet anyone. She looked for her seat. Second row, far left. No corsage, no fanfare, no claim to center. The musicians began tuning. Caleb kissed my temple and said, "You ready?" I nodded, but before I walked down the aisle, I stepped to the side, behind the trees. One last moment with myself. I whispered, "You made it." Not because no one else had believed I could, but because for the first time, I truly did. Then I walked forward. Not to be seen, not to prove anything, just to begin. It happened near the end of the reception when the sun had dipped low enough to turn the orchard gold. The tables were scattered with half-empty glasses and the last crumbs of cake. The string quartet had loosened into something more human, playing ragged but tender versions of old songs. People had kicked off their shoes. Some danced barefoot in the grass. Some just swayed and placed arms around each other, like it was enough to exist like that for a while. I stood beside Caleb, hand resting lightly on his arm, watching everyone we loved melt into the night. Claire sat 2 tables away, posture perfect, smile mechanical. She hadn't moved much, hadn't mingled. She spent most of the evening talking to Evan, who looked like he wanted to be anywhere else. Marissa had drifted toward our friends, her laugh growing easier with every glass of wine. I hadn't spoken to Claire since the whisper. "You were always just a backup plan." She had said it like a truth she'd been holding in for decades, like a final blow she believed I couldn't come back from. But I didn't flinch. I didn't fight. I didn't cry. I just looked at her and said, "Check the guest list." Then I walked down the aisle. And now here we were hours later, and it was time for the toasts. Mona started. She told a story about how I used to rewrite the cafe chalkboard quotes when no one was looking. How she once caught me adding a line under a roomy quote. But what if the quiet ones are also burning? People laughed. Then they paused. Then they clapped. Next was Mr. Lenihan. He held a tiny weathered notebook and read 2 lines I'd written in high school. The people who name you wrong will never hear the sound you make when you finally speak. He looked up and said, Elise, you were never background. You were the voice behind the curtain. And now, curtain's up. My father stood last. He didn't read. Didn't quote anyone. He just said, This is the first time I've seen my daughter this full of light. And I won't lie, it stings a little to know I missed so much of it. But I'm here now, and I see her. He raised his glass. To the girl who waited, and to the man who didn't make her wait anymore. Caleb smiled at me. I could barely breathe. Then it was my turn. I didn't have notes. I didn't plan a speech. I just stood and let the hush come over the crowd like fog. There are 2 kinds of people, I began, when it comes to moments like this. The ones who love the spotlight, and the ones who make space for it to fall on someone else. I let my eyes drift to each face that mattered. To the people who saw me before I saw myself, thank you. For showing up. For standing beside me in rooms that didn't know what to do with me. I paused. The wind caught my dress. I let it. To Caleb, you taught me that love doesn't need a reason or a performance, just presence and patience, and maybe a slightly out-of-tune guitar. Laughter, soft and warm. To the ones who couldn't show up, I said, without raising my voice, I hope someday they learn the difference between being watched and being witnessed. And that was it. No names, not hers. I raised my glass, and they raised theirs. And in that clinking chorus of crystal and intention, I felt something leave me. Not anger, not sadness, just expectation. Claire looked at me then, really looked, and I saw it, the confusion, the ache, the unraveling realization that she was not the star of this stage, that her name had not passed through my lips, that the daughter she once overlooked now stood at the center of a celebration she had no authorship over. She sat still for the rest of the night. Didn't say goodbye when she left. Didn't leave a card or a gift. Just rose, gathered her things, and walked out under the apple trees like a guest who'd stumbled into the wrong story. Marissa came to me after. She's hurt, she said. I nodded. I know. She thinks you erased her. I didn't, I said. She just never wrote herself in. Marissa didn't argue. She hugged me, for the first time in a way that didn't feel performative. You looked whole, she said. Tonight, you looked like someone who finally stopped folding. That night, after everyone left, Caleb and I stayed behind to help gather the lanterns. My dress was muddy at the bottom. My hair had come loose. The wind had picked up just enough to make everything feel like the end of something. We stood in the orchard alone beneath the soft rustle of the trees. I don't feel triumphant, I said. He looked at me. You're not supposed to. How am I supposed to feel free? He said. And I did. Not in a fireworks way, in a quiet way, like finally being able to take off a jacket you didn't know you'd been wearing your whole life. She left before dessert. No announcement, no excuses. Just slipped out like a shadow, losing its light. Someone said they saw her standing alone by the gravel path that led to the parking lot, her clutch tight, under one arm, the wind pulling at her hem. They said she looked confused, like someone had shown up to the wrong address and realized too late. I didn't watch her leave. I didn't need to. I knew the feeling well of slipping out before people noticed you hadn't really been there to begin with. The next morning, I found her voicemail. Her voice was clipped brittle, like she'd rehearsed it, but the tone got away from her. "I suppose you're proud of yourself," she said. "You made your little point. I just hope someday you realize what you're throwing away." There was a pause. "Then you were never easy to love, Elise." Click. That was it. No goodbye, no congratulations, not even a lie to cover it all. I deleted the message without listening to it again. Not out of spite, out of mercy. I wasn't angry anymore. That was the strange thing. The kind of strange that sneaks up on you when the old ache doesn't ache. When the punchline falls flat and you realize the joke was never yours. I sat on the edge of our bed, the one still scattered with dried petals, and unpacked overnight bags, and listened to the quiet. It didn't feel empty. It felt earned. Caleb came in barefoot, hair sleep messy, holding 2 mugs. "Bad one?" he asked. "Expected one." He handed me a mug, to the predictable. I smiled, and to not needing them anymore. We drank in silence. The good kind. The kind that holds space. The kind that doesn't ask for forgiveness or explanation. That afternoon, we danced barefoot in the orchard, just the 2 of us. No music, just the rustle of wind and leftover laughter hanging in the branches. He twirled me once. I stumbled. We laughed. Later, we collected candles. Some were still warm. Some had burned down to their centers. Wax puddles on the grass like little testaments to the night. I picked up one with a faint fingerprint in the side. I didn't know whose it was. That made it better. We drove home with the windows down, hair whipping wild. The drive was long, winding through hills and small towns. At a gas station, I bought a bag of licorice and a pack of gum and ate both before we hit the interstate. We didn't talk about Claire. We didn't need to. The absence had done its work. When we got back to the apartment, there were a few envelopes in the mailbox, bills, a catalog, a small square card with no return address. Inside, a wedding card, blank inside. No name, no handwriting. Just a pre-printed message that read, "Wishing you every happiness." I left it on the counter. Maybe it was her. Maybe it wasn't. It didn't matter. That week, we opened every gift slowly, read every note, took our time. Mona said love is real. I've seen it in how you look at each other when you think no one's watching. Mr. Lenehan sent a poem he'd written just for us. It ended with, "May your silences always be soft and shared." My father sent a photo of us from the wedding, me laughing at something Caleb said, one hand on my chest like I couldn't hold all the joy. On the back, he'd written, "You deserved this before you knew you could." Marissa sent a playlist. No note, just a list of songs that built slowly, each one quieter than the last. I played it while doing laundry and cried folding socks. Every corner of our home felt like a page we were writing together. But the voicemail, her voice hovered for days. Not because I missed her, but because part of me still didn't understand why she couldn't just say, "I'm sorry." Maybe she thought love was a performance. Maybe she believed if you didn't win the room, you didn't win at all. But I stopped playing to rooms a long time ago. One night, I lit a single candle and placed it by the window. Not the pantry candle, a new one. Pale blue, scented with something faintly herbal. I watched it flicker. I didn't think of Claire. I thought of myself. The girl I used to be, sitting in dark corners, asking nothing, holding everything. The woman I was now, choosing quiet, not because it was all she had, but because it was enough. That night, Caleb sat beside me on the floor. "Feeling okay?" he asked. "Yeah." "Want to talk about her?" "No." He nodded. "Okay." And we sat there watching the flame move, not speaking, not needing to. There's a silence that hurts, and there's a silence that heals. I didn't know until now how different they are. When people ask me if I miss her, I tell the truth. I say sometimes I miss the idea of her, but not the woman who made me earn affection like it was rent. Not the woman who couldn't say my name in a room without comparing it to someone else's. Not the woman who looked at my wedding and saw a threat. That silence, the one that grew between us, it's no longer punishment. It's protection. And for the first time, I feel safe inside it. We never put away the candles from the wedding. They live in a box now under our bed, wax edges curled like petals. Some burned clean through. Some only halfway. Some still carry fingerprints from the people who held them, the witnesses. Sometimes when the power flickers or the rain presses too hard on the windows, I'll pull one out. Light it. Just one. No reason. No ceremony. Just the quiet need to remember. I don't light them for her anymore. I don't light them against her either. That part of the story is done. We've been married a year now. Maybe more. Time stopped keeping sharp edges after the wedding. We still eat dinner cross-legged on the couch. Caleb still leaves coffee mugs in strange places. I still wake sometimes in the middle of the night and press my fingers to the garnet ring just to feel the weight of choosing. And every so often, I dream of the pantry, the crooked door, the dark, the candle I hid behind bags of rice. But now in the dream, I'm not alone. That little girl version of me, flannel pajamas, too quiet voice, she sits across from me, legs tangled beneath her flame between us. In the dream, I hand her a match. She lights it herself. I wake up calm. Not triumphant, not victorious. Just here. Just real. Claire hasn't called. Not since the wedding. No cards, no emails, no dramatic closure. She's a closed chapter now. Not because I slammed the book shut, but because I finally stopped rereading the pages, hoping for a different ending. Marissa and I talk more. Still not sisters the way some people imagine sisters, but we're present. We send pictures of dumb things. A dog in a stroller, a typo in a menu. She mailed me a scarf last winter. No note, just soft wool and care. It's enough. My father calls sometimes, brief conversations. He doesn't try to fix the past, just listens. I think that's what healing sounds like, two people willing to exist without rewriting the old script. I still write. Mostly essays, some fiction. People tell me it's powerful, that it cuts deep, that it feels like being seen from the inside out. What they don't know is, I don't write to be understood anymore. I write to stay lit. There are days when the old ache creeps in. The voice that says I'm too much, or not enough. The voice with Claire's shape, but not her name. When that happens, I don't argue with it. I just sit beside it, and I light something small. Not always a candle. Sometimes it's a walk, or a line from a poem, or Caleb's hand resting warm against the middle of my back. But it always burns. That's what I learned in the aftermath. The light doesn't need to shout to survive. It just needs to be real. I used to think power came from being chosen. Now I know it comes from choosing, over and over again. And I choose me, not loudly, not with banners, just in the steady way a flame keeps showing up, even when the wind picks up. Some nights, Caleb reads aloud from books he thinks I'd like. He says my name when he stumbles on something beautiful. Elise, listen to this. No one ever said my name like that growing up, like it deserved to be wrapped around a good sentence, like it meant something whole. We have no children. Maybe someday, maybe not. But if we do, I'll teach them about candles. Not the kind you buy in stores. The kind you carry in your chest. The kind you light when the world tells you you're a shadow. The kind you protect not because you're weak, but because you've finally learned what it took to keep burning. That's the story I'll tell. not of bitterness, or revenge, or even triumph, but of survival softness and one steady flame that no one else got to name.